And we're live. It is Saturday, November 7th, 2020, 5 o'clock p.m.
We have a president-elect.
We have a president-elect. And I have a glass of champagne. I don't have a champagne flute, however, because I'm not that classy. But
neither am I.
Yeah, so I just came back from downtown Washington, where the area around the White House is jammed with people all wearing masks and being appropriate, and yet joyously celebrating. The roads are completely packed with cars, all honking, many of them with people dancing on their roofs, or at least standing up through sunroofs or out through the sides. Because it is D.C., it is a extremely diverse population, reflecting all of the populations that are, shall we say, disaffected with the current administration. And it is loud and raucous and must have been heard by the president as he returned from playing golf today, where he was when he learned that he had become a loser and would be evicted as of January 20th, 2020. Now, I want to stress that we are still not allowed to have fun anymore.
We have a number of days until then.
But among the ways to not have fun, dancing in the streets over the eviction of Donald J. Trump from the White House is one of the best ways to not have fun I have ever seen. And as I was driving along, I never got out of my car because, you can't really park and it is a COVID epidemic and whatever. So, but as we're driving along, all the cars are honking, and I drive up, next to this other car that's here on the other side of the road, and the woman who's driving it leans out the car and says, "And you're Benjamin Wittes." And I said, yeah, I am. And she said...
Does that happen to you often?
No, actually.
Do people recognize you in public?
Well, I get recognized in public every now and then, but not you. But first of all, it's usually in close proximity to having spent a lot of time on television, and it doesn't happen, like if I go a few months without doing a lot of TV, everybody, people really forget who you are, which is great. But I've never had my car stopped before by somebody recognizing me. So if you are that person and you saw and it is because you recognized me from In Lieu of Fun and you're in the audience now, you should out yourself so we can have you on screen and say hello properly. Because while I'm driving is not usually the greatest time. If you're not, well, oh well. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, we have a new president-elect, and that is pretty freaking cool. So, cheers.
Cheers, Ben.
How are you feeling, Kate?
I texted you, I think, a few minutes after I found out. I don't know. Everyone likes a good how you found out story. I was sitting in the kitchen doing work, and John said, did you see your parents and my mom's text? And I was like, no. And I thought something had gone horribly wrong, actually. But they were just texting to celebrate. And he said the AP just called it for Biden. And I just and then I went on Twitter and people had posted videos of New York erupting in honking, like you said, and all, and I just tuned in and I saw my neighborhood live streamed in celebration, and it was so great. I don't know, it was just it was chills and this feeling of, I think someone on Twitter said, slowly starting to unclench. It's just but that's what it feels like. I'm we're all exhausted. I have a really hard time taking joy in somebody's defeat in an election.
I don't.
And I know, but
not even a little bit.
I know, but I do, and it's because my mom, when she ran for her first campaign, we like sunk all of our money. I was in third grade. We'd sunk all of our money. We'd had all of these. We'd been working nonstop for months and months. Like, it was this really, she was kind of the underdog in this race, and she won at like 4:00 in the morning with one county reporting like just like a huge number of votes for her for some reason. And I just remember this really clearly, and I remember thinking how crappy it almost felt to like lose an election when you were actually running. I don't really give a shit about that right now. Like, I'm not feeling very sorry.
If you're focused, on the agony that the Trumpists must feel right now, you're a better person than I.
I'm just saying that I have a lot of empathy for people in this scenario, and everyone has a limit, and that is my limit. Like, I'm just like, not gonna care. I'm just overjoyed. I am, however, I think we should, I don't want to like not enjoy this for obvious reasons, but I would like, I think it's super interesting because I did go over and talk to my neighbors a little bit, and we have avoided largely talking about politics for most of the summer and year that we've lived next to them. And, what they said, one of them said, I just really feel like we're just not patriots anymore. People are just not patriotic. Like, this is just the death of patriotism. And I said, well, Biden's son served. And she goes, his drug-addled son. And I go, no, like the one who died of brain cancer. She goes, he had a son that died of brain cancer? And I was like,
low
yep.
Information voters, man.
And I was like, really? And she was like, I never knew that. And I go, yeah, like, Biden's always like has a long history of like really deep tragedy. And she goes, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, his wife dying. When did his wife die? No, I mean like his first wife. His first wife and his daughter died in a car accident. Like, his kids were in a coma. He took the oath of office at his son's hospital bed when he was like 7 or 8. And she's like, I never knew any of that. That happened? And I was like, holy shit. And kudos to Biden for never campaigning on it ever. So that it's like almost like, unless, I just thought that for me was just kind of like, I wasn't even like upset about it. I just was like, wow. That's just like a lot that you don't know. Like, that was just like a whole lot.
People live in different information ecosystems. And
yep.
in many information ecosystems in this country, the only thing people know about Joe Biden is that his son Hunter has a laptop.
Yes.
And
she thinks that he had one son. She has kids in the military. She doesn't know that Biden's kids were in the military or that they served, and like, I think Bo won a medal. I thought that he won like something for his service. Anyways, the point is just that I was just like, it was like, she was saying, I just really want this country to come together and be united. And I want to say that we walked away from the conversation and she was like, I feel like a bad person that I never did the work to figure that out, and that all I've been listening to is this one side of the story. So I thought that was also a good way to like walk away.
All right, so we have no agenda today. We are not going to plan the show for the week today because, whose week is it for a mystery guest?
Yours.
So yeah. I will have a mystery guest for tomorrow.
Yeah, I had Sam on. Sam was on.
No, because last week was...
we did Scott.
We did.
Sarah.
And Sarah. So it's
God, that was a really fun show.
That was a great show. So it is my week for a mystery guest because Sam was the week before that, and that was yours. So I will bring a mystery guest tomorrow, and then we can reserve the last few minutes of the show tomorrow to plan the week. But today, I think we want to hear from you guys.
Yeah.
And drink champagne. I mean, shit. So, Mike Godwin, the floor is yours. I'm just going to bring people in And then we will...
My chapstick is still broken. Not everything is right with the world.
All right. Auntie. Whoops.
Hello.
Are you wearing a captain's hat?
No, it's actually my master's graduation hat. I figured this is, a celebration, so I should wear something festive.
Oh,
Excellent.
Very good.
All right, the floor is yours.
Okay, so my question is that after the Trump campaign announced their upcoming legal actions at the Four Seasons Landscaping Company car park.
What was that? Oh my God, I almost forgot that happened today. Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. So do you expect the spiral of incompetence to just go way down with their planned legal actions, going forward, and what might that even look like? And please don't just answer with "that's Rudy." I won't accept that.
Well, so Kate, what do you think about this?
What? I didn't hear the last part of the question.
Whether we expect a spiral of incompetence in the context of these legal actions.
Yes, but I don't think that that's going to stop them from happening. And us having to waste time dealing with them, right? Like there's going to like, what spiral of incompetence in what way? Like they're going to just be like half-assed briefs and like they're just going to be terrible kind of filings, or do you think that it's going to be? I think that's true. I think you've already seen that with a lot of them, but yeah, I just think they're going to be a distraction. They're just going to be filed for the formality of filing them so they can say on Fox News that there's multiple suits happening contesting the election, right? Like that's like the only point of doing it, I think.
I think that's right. I forget who said this. So somebody was quoted saying the other day that without a coherent legal theory, a lawsuit is just a tweet with a filing fee.
Yeah.
And
like
and I think that's actually, but it's a good thing to keep in mind, right? So even if you have even if you have a lot of anger, and they clearly have a lot of anger, and even if you have can use words like voter fraud, which they throw around kind of blithely, in order to convince a court that there's an actual problem with an election count, you have to state that something illegal happened, and that the thing may have caused enough votes to be improper that somehow accounts for the difference.
Yeah.
Now, in Georgia, the number of votes separating them is in the few thousand range, which is, not the kind of thing that you usually flip by not the kind of thing that you usually flip with a recount, but it's very close. And so that's, you could imagine if you could come up with a legal theory that was coherent, you could imagine, But Pennsylvania and Nevada, you're talking about tens of thousands of votes. That does not flip. And so I think these results are very likely to be quite robust. And Daniel is saying Georgia is 7,000 votes now. So, I mean, that's not a...
Why haven't they called North Carolina for Trump?
Because there are still... because the vote is held open for votes that come in after Election Day, but were postmarked beforehand, and they don't know how many of those there are going to be. So I think that they're just being cautious, as with Alaska, which I don't think anybody doubts Trump will win.
Yep.
So look, they can make a fair bit of noise, but so far they have gotten traction exactly nowhere, and that's because they don't have a theory of, even if in courts that are sympathetic, you have to state a theory, right? And they don't have one because there's actually nothing wrong with the way this election was conducted. So I do think we're likely to see, I don't know if it's incompetence, it's ineffectiveness, and it's, even with very good counsel, if you don't have a case, there's no case to talk about.
Yeah, the only thing that I was gonna say is that it was funny because on Tuesday when we talked about feeling kind of morose on Tuesday night, and then things kind of swinging overnight, I remembered that we had had a conversation on Tuesday that was during the show in which you had just come from the Healthy Elections podcast and you were very upbeat about how good things looked and how you really thought that a lot that Pennsylvania needed all these poll workers. They got the poll workers, all of these things, and things had happened. And as I went to bed on Tuesday night feeling like maybe it was a rehash of 2016 except possibly worse, I kind of was I wish that I wish that we could make some case that this election got stolen and that there wasn't, and that we weren't on record saying that everything was fair and square beforehand. But then I was I wouldn't want it anyway, and I kind of went to bed. And I really do think that it was fair and square. I don't understand where all of this stuff about lost. I don't know. I've looked.
Well, it comes because people want to make it. Because people make up shit because they don't want to lose. Look, there are two goods here, and they're not distinct from. They're distinct from one another. One is whether we ran an election that honors the will of the voters and that people got a chance to vote. They got a chance to have their votes counted. There is only one country that runs serious elections with bigger population than we have, and that's India. India tolerates a level of election violence that we would never tolerate. It is miraculous, by the way, that India pulls off its elections at an administrative level. But we would not accept an Indian election as okay by our standards. The second, other than that, there is no other country that has 200 million registered vote or, eligible, 250 million eligible voters. And, getting them all in a position to actually vote in a country, by the way, which doesn't have national ID, right? We don't have population registries. It's a very complicated thing. And doing it in the middle of a pandemic is really hard. And so we would, at an administrative level, we should feel good about that, even if, Trump had won. The second good is getting a result in the election that we can be proud of from a national point of view and that represents something that is remotely consistent with values that we should hold. And that's a substantive thing. And I think we really did both. And I think we have a lot to be proud of democratically here. No, David Botts, the floor is yours, but you're muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We can.
Okay. Well, I don't want to start crying on air, but maybe I will. Because I almost started crying when I saw the news and I saw everybody on the streets. But now I'm crying because I'm looking at Professor Klonick and Mr. Wittes. And you two have been just such a joy to me. You're a joy. So,
well, thank you.
Thanks, David.
But my real question is, what are your recommendations for the first set of executive orders to try and undo some of the things that have been done?
Ooh, that's a very interesting question.
Really good question.
So, let me get you to narrow it for a minute. You mean substantive executive orders, not appointments or policy pronouncements, but actual orders that the president can issue on substantive matters?
Yes, I mean to to start to undo some of the real life human misery that has been underway these years?
Yeah, so there are a few real low-hanging fruit here. The first is that the third travel ban is still in effect. Its principal consequence is that large numbers of people who live in Los Angeles or are otherwise of Iranian descent can't visit with their relatives. And people don't know this about Iranians, but they actually come to the United States all the time. A huge number of them have families in there are a lot of Iranian Americans, and despite the hostility between the United States and Iran, Iranians do come to the United States. Some of them study here, and the travel ban has really, really affected that. So this could be done away with a stroke of a pen. That's thing number one. Thing number two is this. There's a whole bunch of largely symbolic executive orders that have some weird effects. So some of the, I wrote about one that involves the designation of Confederate monuments as priority protection matters for DHS in the context of protests. And that DHS had basically interpreted that, probably rightly, for all I know, as authority to focus on protesters for purposes of certain certain surveillance activities. That just needs to be done away with. And a new president could do away with it, just tear it in half on the first day. There are a whole bunch of ones like that, things that were meant to be press release kind of executive orders to make Trump appear that he's doing something. But then, of course, when the president gives an order, the agencies actually have to interpret it and, apply it in some way. And so they get applied in very weird ways that maybe nobody anticipated. Those should all be removed. If they're not doing active work that's good, they don't need to exist. The country got along just fine without them. The order ending DACA and DAPA could both be rescinded. Those were done. Those weren't actually technically executive orders. They were done by the Attorney General. But we could. Basically everything that Trump has done by executive order could be undone by executive order. Now, some of them, again, are not technically executive orders. They're proclamations or they're, attorney general's memos or something. But they're, you're done. You live by the executive unilateral order. You die by it. And there's just a lot of policy, environmental stuff too. There's the patriotic education order, right? There's a whole bunch of these things. And I expect them all to disappear really fast. And, if you're...
You think they'll get rid of the social media order? That, bizarro one? Because I was thinking about that. But Biden hates Section 232, so...
Right, but he doesn't hate Section 230 because it's biased against... Because the social media companies are... Because he wants to have a study of bias against conservatives, right?
Yeah, that's true. So, he'll make his own if he wants to do it. So.
Yeah, or he'll... send a legislative proposal to Congress. There's actually, if you can imagine, an area where there's a potential bipartisan, there's a lot of bipartisan discontent with 230 right now, and you could really imagine a sort of crafted thing, that could be legislated on. So I think that it's a very rich area for a new administration to just come in and do stuff. Oh, the other thing is this civil service change. Now, how much that can be exploited between now and January, I don't know, but it certainly can be revised or removed as soon as the new president takes office. So I assume that a huge amount of the stuff that Trump did just by waving his wand will be undone very, very quickly. Almost none of it is doing any work that Joe Biden would want to have done. And a lot of the work that it is doing is really bad. Also, there are national emergency declarations, southern border related national emergency declarations that could be rescinded. So, it's a pretty rich field.
I like this list that we've got going. This is fun.
Yeah, this is just what I came up with off the top of my head. But it's a long list. And now the bad news about it is, with few exceptions, most of them are largely symbolic. And so the symbolism of revoking symbols is itself not all that substantive, but I do think it'll make for a very good feeling first few days. All right.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Bye, David.
Thank you.
You know what I don't know if this is in the list of questions, but I wonder if who's going to be the first couple of people he pardons?
You mean Trump?
Yeah.
Oh, God. I mean, I assume Flynn will get a pardon, and I wouldn't be surprised if Manafort gets a pardon, too.
Yeah.
Yep. The interesting question is whether he will preemptively pardon either himself or any of his kids, and that's going to be a subject of a lot of speculation over the next 74 days.
Do you think that that's going to make a difference if he does that? If he pardons family members, do you think that that's gonna that there's going to be a particular kind of people are gonna have a particular backlash over that, or at this point they're just the whole family is so in such a mess and in the weeds with him that that won't be a glimmer of kind of surprise?
So honestly, I don't know. I mean, I think people kind of expect him to do it, and in that sense there's a certain amount of pricing in his outrageousness. On the other hand, I also think he could pardon Rudy, right? Some of it depends on how much exposure these people have, which we really don't know. And, I assume because they are in large measure horrible people, that some of them need it, but some of them may not believe they have exposure, and therefore might not want it. Remember, Roger Stone, for example, didn't want a pardon. He wanted a commutation because he wants to appeal his conviction and be vindicated. So there may be particular reasons why something doesn't happen, but I think we're going to see a spree of abusive pardons. And also, he also does pardons that are designed not to advantage himself, but to just sort of own the libs type pardons, like our Sheriff Joe Arpaio or Dinesh D'Souza, right, or Conrad Black. These don't actually serve Donald Trump particularly. They're just fuck yous. Daniel Burge.
I just want to echo David's sentiment. Just the way that your guys' episode, especially on election night, took some of the stress off, just being able to focus on a different subject other than worrying about what the hell is going to happen, really made a big difference.
Well, thank you.
I think I will say I am happy with how the week leading up to the election, the shows came together. I thought that they were all they were really fun, and they were cathartic for me too, as are your questions. This community is awesome, and everyone always is so warm and kind to each other and respectful, and it makes you believe in the power of the internet for good again. If I wasn't that naive.
So I'll condense my question. Now that we have the election results, and I know there's a series of lawfare articles on this, how robust is the formalization of these electoral college results?
In what sense do you mean that?
Trump team trying to subvert the results, say, by trying to appoint a fraudulent slate of electors.
I see.
Okay.
Kate, do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, I feel like we came into this in 2000. I mean, if it didn't happen in 2016, I don't know though. It's a different set of people. But like in 2016, I remember vividly the conversation around faithless electors and the idea that there was like people had a moral obligation to step away from their duties and vote for and cast their vote as they were, and nobody did. I don't think I think that's a lot of grandstanding. I don't see that happening. Do you?
Yeah, so there's really 3 embedded questions here, and let's tease them out and separate them. So the first is, can you realistically challenge the election of the state of the group of electors that are, say, in Pennsylvania, pledged to Biden? That's a litigation question, right? Most states have procedures for contesting elections. So the answer to that question is see earlier discussion about whether any of these litigations have any prospect of success. And again, my view is they will all peter out, and quickly, because there is actually no real problem with the vote. So that's question number 1. Question number 2, will electors defect, i.e. the point Kate is making about faithless electors, right? There is, in some states, they have rules that are called binding elector rules, which always sounds a little bit kinky to me. And
you used that line in the lawfare thing, and it was weird then.
Yeah, well, so the binding electors laws aside, some states don't have that, and so you could imagine a few Biden electors defecting to Trump or something like that. This, as a general matter, doesn't happen, and the reason it doesn't happen is that states elect party loyalists as electors. They're essentially, the Democratic Party names its slate of electors. They are, think in your own mind how many Democratic activists you know who are likely to defect to Donald Trump. The answer is none. Sometimes they will defect. They will defect to the right of, or to the left of the Democratic Party, or to the right of the Republican Party, but they're generally party loyalists. So you could theoretically have like somebody insists on voting for Bernie or something. It's not going to happen. People are so eager to get rid of Trump. So I think there's not a lot of risk of a faithless elector problem. The third issue is, could the state legislature step in and appoint its own slate of electors instead of the elected slate of electors? And the answer to that is there is a very interesting argument that they could. And that is an argument that came up in the concurrence in Bush v. Gore that Justices Scalia and Thomas and Rehnquist wrote. It is controversial, and Larry Lessig, the Harvard law professor, wrote a piece on Lawfare about it yesterday, arguing that it was not an available option. So it's constitutionally contentious. It would certainly be challenged if they tried. That said, I think there is no likelihood that they will try. And the evidence of that is that the Republican leadership of the Pennsylvania legislature made clear today that they didn't see any evidence of voter fraud. They didn't seem to have any appetite for overruling the rules, the votes of the people. So I think there is a theoretical possibility that it could happen, but it is only a theoretical possibility. And it would be very hard for me to believe that faced with a 100,000 vote deficit in Pennsylvania, that the legislature of Pennsylvania would step in and overrule or try to overrule the vote of the people. That said, one other important point, since Arizona is likely eventually to be called for Biden, even if the Pennsylvania legislature did step in, Biden would have 270 votes without any votes from Pennsylvania.
I was going to say that'll feel like insurance.
Exactly. So it would be a fruitless gesture.
Exactly.
Jim McGuckin.
Hi, guys. Listen, I'll get to the point. I'm very worried. It's sort of like an old doomsday cartoon where the stag had a bullseye on its back and someone said, that's a hell of a birthmark. I'm an old guy. COVID's a problem for me. But I think COVID is a real catastrophic issue right now. And I think Biden is starting to really try to develop a task force or something to go for it. And I realize transition. I understand everybody's talking about executive orders after January. But right now we've got a problem. Ben, do you remember the lilies in the pond analogy where 5 days the lilies are just sort of benign out there, little flowers. The sixth day they take over the universe. That's exponential growth.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm an economist. I understand the stupid math. Okay, and so the point I'm making is Biden needs to get on this. Do you think Trump is going to try to thwart him on it? I know some governors. I actually talked to some of these people, and they are getting really scared. And so they're trying to form a coalition right now. I'm just worried about Trump.
What do you think, Kate? Is he gonna actively frustrate a COVID response?
I don't think so. I mean, unless he can get... The only situation that I can see him doing something like that is if he can get some type of some highly symbolic or kind of very press conference-y kind of mileage out of it. But I don't see him... I mean, I could be totally wrong with this. I kind of feel like he's just going to become obsessed with himself and obsessed with his legacy. And I don't think he's going to particularly care all of the things that Biden is putting together to do in January. I think that he's just going to I think this is the next kind of couple of weeks and months are just going to be about Trump. And not that they haven't always been, but especially. And don't you feel like he's going to have a real fuck you to the American people almost, in terms of just wanting to not having any desire to do anything for anyone? Let's remember how much he didn't actually want this job, right? This is he's lost 4 years that he could have been hanging out in Florida golfing at his precious resort. And I just kind of think that I think that's too much effort for him to want to come after him to go after the Biden's potential COVID response. What do you think, Ben? Am I off base?
I think, look, the COVID response failure, as best as I can tell, was largely a function of two things. One was total lack of management skills. And the second was extreme vanity.
Yeah.
And egomania. I assume that he will do very little on COVID between now and January 20th because he's done very little on it before now. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a fair bit of posturing and claiming credit for things. But I don't think he's likely, if there were obvious levers for him to pull that didn't contradict his self-image, he would have pulled them already. And and so I don't really know. I mean, look, I think the big thing he could do that would frustrate the new administration is messaging against their new message. So if the new administration comes in and says, we're really going to push to have people wear masks, we're going to work with governors to have mask mandates, we're going to, etc. You could imagine Donald Trump really undermining that by, with a kind of don't wear masks campaign, right?
Yeah, but I don't think that's limited to just COVID response. Like, I think he'll do that with everything that the new administration brings up.
Right. So I agree with that, but the question was particular to COVID.
Yes.
And so I look, I do think Biden is going to have a persistent problem with basically a former president as troll, which is not a thing that any president has really ever had before. There is a tradition of prior presidents, even across parties, not criticizing each other. And I think there's a very good reason for that, which is that governing is really hard, and these guys know it. And so there's a kind of respect for the problems that they face. George W. Bush basically didn't criticize Barack Obama. And Barack Obama mostly didn't criticize George W. Bush, at least once he was in office. I think Trump is going to violate that tradition very flamboyantly, and COVID may be the place where that criticism is most consequential, because a huge amount of effective COVID response lies in good messaging and people doing public spirited things because the authorities ask them to do it. And you don't have to have a whole lot of defections before that system doesn't work.
Yeah.
Lauren Roberts.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too, under better circumstances than last time.
Indeed.
That can pretty much say
I like
about
your sweatshirt.
Oh, thanks.
What does it say?
Yeah, I don't know. I tried to translate it with Google Translate. Someone's going to have to tell me. So I'm just concerned about these departures at the National Nuclear Security Agency, the USAID, and the Energy Agency. Do you have is there an overarching narrative there? Is there something? I've seen news of the departures, but haven't heard. I mean, the chief of the NNSA, that's disturbing.
Yeah, we don't. The short answer is we don't really know.
Okay.
Brace yourself for more of them. I mean, the president has floated the idea of firing the FBI director,
right,
which would be a terrible thing to do, although a gift to his successor, because like the last thing Biden wants is to be, saddled with Chris Wray. On the other hand, and I'm sure he would love to have his own appointment for a 10-year term to the FBI. That said, we're really risking doing violence to the idea that the FBI is not a political position. He's also talked about firing Anthony Fauci, which I don't think he can actually do. I think Fauci has civil service protections.
Didn't you propose giving him a MacArthur grant, Ben, like in case he was fired?
So that's and actually the MacArthur Foundation responded to that.
Really?
Yeah, I was so.
What's the upside for what I don't understand is what the upside for Trump is. I mean, he seems so self-centered that doing things like, what is the benefit of getting rid of is it just a vendetta?
Vindictive energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, like what he thinks he's going to get. But so if you fire the FBI director, presumably the deputy FBI director becomes the acting director, and that's a guy named David Bowditch, who's like not gonna be particularly pressurable by Donald Trump over 2 months, right? So it's I think it's just a way of humiliating Chris Wray.
But that makes sense. But it's these other people that that like I don't even feel like Donald Trump is in the weeds, what are now weeds, enough to know like what even USAID does, right? Like, but what's the political affiliation or what's going on there that. So who's calling those shots?
My assumption is that all of these cases are what unites them is not that there's some overarching story. It's that Trump is highly vindictive, and in each case there's some particular story that may be discrete to the agency in question. like, for example, he's angry at Fauci because Fauci believes in masks and won't say that everything's going well. He's angry at Chris Wray because Chris Wray won't lock up Hillary Clinton or, start an investigation of Hunter Biden.
Right.
And, those are, I mean, I suppose there is an overarching thread between them, which is these are both professional positions that these people have taken that happen to make Donald Trump look stupid. But I don't know if that's the through line, or sometimes people get removed for other reasons as well. Right. So I assume that we're going to find out the answers to a lot of these questions.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Is it common that people leave in this? I mean, is it just also sort of a political status quo?
It's not usually this short after the election.
Yes.
Like,
So
or it's right.
The normal rule, at least for political appointees, is if you stay in office past January 1st of the election year, you stay until the lights go out.
So were these people implicated by the EO that he just, is the EO what enabled?
No, the president can remove people at will.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so some of these people are in professional positions, but it's not typical at all. For example, when Esper let it be known that he had written
his letter,
a letter of resignation, it would be very unusual for the Secretary of Defense to resign 2 months before an administration goes out. The Secretary of Defense presumptively should be sitting there, should be turn the keys over to to Michelle Flournoy when she shows up as SecDef. Right. There should be, Esper should be there to the end, and I assume that leak was Esper saying, I will quit before I'll turn out the troops to, right, overturn the election. I think that was the message that was being sent there. I don't know the story behind any of the others, and I just made up the story behind Esper. So,
It sounds like Trump's tweeting again. Someone's putting the all caps in the comments. It looks like the Trump's back on Twitter from his golf game. So thank you guys so much for everything.
It's great. It's great to see you,
Lauren.
You too.
Thanks for running the Twitter.
Yeah, Lauren's been running.
Of course, we've got 300 more followers now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, Mike Godwin.
I'm looking up this thing. Lex Inhofe is screaming at people, I guess, about it. At least
Inhofe is screaming about what?
For.
We lost Kate.
Haggerty out of office of the NSA.
Huh.
So I don't know. So that's weird to me too. I don't know which direction that points. Sorry, I went to Defense News because I was I should go to somewhere that's gonna have a much better. Anyway, so I don't know. That's a really great question. I had heard about that one, but I hadn't heard about the others. So.
Mike Godwin, what's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So I've been thinking about the security briefings that former presidents get. It troubles me because, as you know, former presidents have been getting these for a long time, and they don't misuse the information that they get. President Trump has made it clear during his term that he sort of magically or automatically declassifies classified content. I don't see any reason to think he won't continue or to feel the impulse to do that if he's getting briefings as an ex-president. Number one, what are the authorities, that require that he be given the briefing? And number two, what are we looking at, including possible criminal penalties, if he tries to declassify by fiat as an ex-president?
Okay, I think that's an easy one. An ex-president is not an original classification authority and thus has no authority to classify or declassify information. An ex-president also generally has a clearance by virtue of the grace of the incumbent. That is, it is useful for the incumbent president for ex-presidents to have access to certain information so that they can talk about it, or so that they can, he can send them as a special envoy to the, to northern Sudan, right? And so generally, as a matter of some combination of courtesy and convenience, current presidents allow ex-presidents to be briefed. I think Trump will test that, as he tests many things, but he would have no authority to, and in fact it would be criminal for him to disclose that information. He would have no authority to declassify it. Now, what he could do, if he were really devious, is declassify it before he left office, right? Like a kind of, midnight judges kind of sign a whole lot of declassification orders and then walk out. But of course, if the incoming president knew that, he could reclassify that material quickly as well. And so I think the bigger concern, honestly, is the thing that I'm very worried about. He's disclosed a huge amount of classified material as president, including, information about allied covert ops to the Russian foreign minister in the Oval Office. I mean, like really, really bad stuff, super sensitive stuff. And my best instinct is that he didn't do that. He did that because he has an uncontrolled desire to talk and to say shit. And so he did. And I think the likelihood that he will spill classified material in an ongoing way. I mean, think about how many times he will want to say things about Pete Strzok, and how rarely
how little impulse control he has.
How little impulse control he will have, and how rarely he will check, is that still classified? Now, in the intelligence community, they call that spillage, which is like sort of not necessarily, it's not espionage, right? You're not knowingly or intentionally disclosing classified material, but sort of like spillages happen all the time. But they don't usually happen from people who have basically all of the crown jewels. And Trump has an enormous amount of information that should not become public. And I can imagine him disclosing it accidentally. I could imagine him disclosing it, frankly, as a result of leverage that entities might have over him. That information stays valuable, and if you owe $400 million, things happen. And I could also imagine him just spilling it maliciously. He hates certain people a lot. And so that's
another impulse control thing. Like, it's like he can't help himself. Like, when he feels so, like Dan would be like, the whiny toddler. Like, he's just going to scream out something that's really hurtful and really bad, no matter how all of the terrible consequences. I just think, I just totally see that happening.
Yeah, so I'm just more worried about that than I am about his ability to declassify material. All right, we've got 6 more minutes, and I have a 6 o'clock meeting. So.
Oh my gosh, the time flies when you're not having fun.
Yes, when you're having in lieu of fun, time flies. So we've got 2 more questions. We're going to get through them. Christopher.
Thank you, Ben and Kate. I wanted to second David's remarks on behalf of your international expat and international guests, and say that I left DC in 2015, and with the Trump administration felt, sort of helplessness in terms of like I was away and what could I do? But surround yourself with good people and have good ideas, and I think that's like the sort of ethos of this group is apply in the future with good ideas and good people.
Thanks, Christopher.
My question was about the soon-to-be open Senate seat in California, but I also sort of wanted to fold in a question sort of about how does Biden deal with the Senate and McConnell being a creature of the Senate. He has this idea of collegiality and thinking that he can just deal with McConnell but I was wondering if you guys had any sort of more Machiavellian ideas for how he could deal with him. And then sort of what your thoughts were about what the governor of California should do in terms of appointing a new senator for Kamala Harris's seat, whether it should be more of like a veteran caretaker to go to the next election, or whether, such an important seat for California to have the power, sort of like a pardon power. He could appoint anyone he wants, whether he should be appointing, his sort of a younger person who's going to have the advantage of being the incumbent for the election in 2 years.
Interesting question. Kate, your thoughts?
Well, I've heard that Kamala Harris's seat in California is like the subject of a lot of contention, obviously, with Democrats. And I have heard also that it looks like it's going to be coming from whoever it is will be coming from Southern California. That's all I've kind of seen. Ben, have you seen more than that?
Well, so I mean, I actually have strong feelings on the merits of it, which is that I think that if any politician has ever earned a Senate appointment seat, it is Adam Schiff in California.
Adam, yes, but then that's just kind of like opens another.
And so I think there's I actually think it's a question that on the merits has a really good answer. That said, my impression is that in California there is enormous pressure for statewide office to be held by a Latino at this point, which has been been a really important voting base block for Democrats and has been underrepresented in top offices in the state, and so my understanding is, and I'm not a California politics watcher,
I thought it was Alex Padilla, the Secretary of State, has been mentioned.
Well, and Becerra as well. I do think people who follow California politics more closely than I am all seem to think that is something that should happen and will. And so, I don't. Beyond that, I'm not sure I have a whole lot of insight into it. All right, the last question goes to Esther. Esther, the floor is yours. You're invisible, but for
apparently, I don't know why.
I don't either, but we can hear you.
Oh, good. Sorry. Last question. I had two up. I'll connect them. A while back, you talked about being friends and having conversations with groups of people that you maybe hadn't really talked so much with before. So we've got a huge umbrella now of left, right, and center during the Trump era. My question is, how do we keep that going? Keep the dialogue in a post-Trump era? Does it depend on how Trumpy or not Trumpy the Republican Party becomes? And a connected question, how much deference will the Republican Senate give to Biden's choices for a cabinet? Will that be a first indication of how obstructionist if it's a Republican Senate, will be? Thanks.
All right, I am going to. I have thoughts on both of these. Kate, do you want to go first?
I mean, I think the answer to the question, is it going to be a sign of how obstructionist it is absolutely. I think that is going to be one of the first things that a Republican Senate can leverage against the administration, and I just think that they probably will. That's my indication, and I think that also depends on how much you watch and see people distance themselves in the Republican Party from Trump over the course of the next 3 months. If they back away from him consistently and he's kind of gets left out in the cold a little bit, maybe they won't make such a stand. But if they're still hopping mad and they feel like this election really has been stolen and that idea gets momentum in some capacity among conservatives, I think that there'll probably be a very robust pushback against his cabinet selection.
So I would say I'm cautiously optimistic on the cabinet and very optimistic on the future of the cross-ideological coalition in favor of small d democratic values. And I have to go to this meeting, so I'm going to be very brief about this. On the cabinet, there is a very long tradition of giving the president the deference on the cabinet. The vote will be the Senate will be very close one way or the other. People like Susan Collins, whatever her other faults, are not going to be looking to stab Joe Biden in the back on his cabinet. The usual rule is that you find a sacrificial lamb to vote down in the cabinet and you let the rest through. Now, we're in polarized times. Could it be different? Yeah, it could be different. Also, if you're Mitch McConnell and you want to really, keep your coalition together for the big fights, which are to say Biden's legislative priorities, maybe you don't want to spend that energy preventing Michelle Flournoy from being Secretary of Defense. So I'm cautiously optimistic on the cabinet. I am very optimistic on the future of the cross-ideological coalition that I kind of hypothesized 4.5 years ago, and through the efforts of a lot of people actually has come into existence. And the reason I'm optimistic about it is because these people like each other, and they actually found really important values that they share, and they have this searing experience of being in the trenches together. And
that's a great point.
And that's lasting. And some of them have written about it. David French and Yasha Monk, for example. Anne Applebaum has spoken very publicly about how she's had to rethink her whole way of thinking about the left. All of us, Bill Kristol, and if you put a whole lot of people like Kristen Clark of the Leadership Conference of Civil Rights and David French in the same room over a long period of time, they come to admire each other. They come to be influenced by each other. And, and so I actually think that is and finally, one other point on that, there is an obvious agenda for a Biden administration, which is to say COVID and police reform and the economy, that would unite a huge group of those people would all agree to. And so I actually think there's a fair amount, and there will be things they will disagree with. They're never going to agree about, abortion. And, a mature coalition understands that, there are things that people are allowed to drop out on. And so I think it's going to have some persistence, and I'm really optimistic about that. On that note, I am now 4 minutes late for a meeting, and I hate Zoom meetings, toy tanks, but there are our lives now. So we don't have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, we have Zoom meetings and a new president-elect.
And the first female